Welcome to my World History Notes, where I read from the book that I wrote to teach homeschoolers world history. A Bible believer looks at world history. You can find it on lulu.com, amazon.com, or at the Bible Baptist bookstore, or just follow me here. It is a survey of world history. It's not real deep, just covers things that you should know the topics. You don't necessarily going to agree with my interpretation, especially if you're not a Bible believer. So if you're a Muslim, atheist, Hindu, Roman Catholic, other Protestant denominations, you're not going to accept some of the conclusions I draw, but you should know about these topics or have an understanding of them so you can be conversant in world history. And that's my goal anyway. That's what I hope. I'm just a regular person, not a scholar. So now let me begin. We're going to talk about the British Isles, and we were talking about the political ramifications because people believed of the Black Plague, the Black Death was a punishment for sin, personal and national. Um, and so, speaking of politics, William the First of England consolidated his conquest between 1067 and 1071. He's known as William the Conqueror. He successfully stopped many Anglo-Saxon uprisings and even defeated a Danish-backed force that had captured the city of York. In 1072, he invaded Scotland. In 1073, he reconquered the French province of Maine, which he claimed. He then invaded Brittany, which was forced back off due to pressure from Philip. Excuse me, he invaded Brittany, but was forced to back off due to pressure from Philip the First of France, against whom he warred in 1087, accidentally being killed in the effort. His son William II took over and reigned until 1100, almost constantly fighting with his brother Robert, who wanted the throne. The fourth son of William I, the Conqueror, was Henry I, who reigned from 1100 to 1135. He continued fighting with Robert until capturing him in the Battle of Tinchebray. Henry, is it Tinchebray? Tinchebray, Tinchebrai. Henry declared himself Duke of Normandy and King of England, fighting a war with Louis VI of France. Stephen, Henry's nephew, reigned from 1135 to 1154, fighting a constant battle with his cousin Matilda, Henry's daughter. A truce was finally concluded at the Battle of Wallingford, 1154. Henry II began to rule in 1154. He was Matilda's son and founded the important Plantagenet dynasty of kings of England. Remember, all of these people spoke the French of the time and had roots in France. Although French speakers made up only 2% of the English population at any given time, they ruled until the 1400s. The aristocracy began to act more like English than Anglo-Norman kings. It took losing their territory in France to cut their ties with French soil. Henry II was a capable ruler and married the famous Eleanor of Aquitaine, whose marriage to Louis VII of France had been annulled. This made Henry II of England the largest landholder in France due to Eleanor's family connections, thereby creating the cause for the Hundred Years' War. Henry was usually at war with Louis, who was technically his lord, as being a landholder in France, made the King of England a subject to the King of France. He invaded Wales and attempted to invade Ireland. He did suppress the last Anglo-Saxon revolt in 1174, which may have been inspired by his possible order of the murder of the Archbishop of Canterbury, Thomas à Becket, by Norman knights. He constantly warred against his own sons, Henry, Richard, Geoffrey, and John, who were always shifting alliances between brothers and their father and Philip II, Augustus of France. In 1199, Richard, who was said to have been the very epitome of the chivalrous knight, took over England as Richard I. He was known as Richard the Lionhearted, the hero of the Third Crusade, who spent more time away from England than actually ruling it. He also fought a war with Philip of France, winning his greatest battle at Gisors. He was succeeded by his brother John, who ruled from 1199 to 1216. This is the era of the legend of Robin Hood and his merry men. It may have been based on a true story, but it also may have been an accumulation of various legends. John's most famous contribution to real history was his compromise with the feudal barons of England in a document called the Magna Carta, or Great Charter, which is a forerunner of our Constitution. This is one of the, excuse me, many documents that paved the way for Anglo-Saxon freedom and English-inspired republican government, a process of hundreds of years, which explains why no other culture, such as Russia, Arab, or Spanish, has been able to duplicate it so successfully as America. The process of true freedom took nearly 1,000 years and does not come overnight. The document was written in Latin and is rather vague, but outlines concessions made by John to acknowledge freedoms that had already been granted by previous kings to the nobility. Like our Declaration of Independence, it was not drawn up to create new rights, but to demand the sovereign's acknowledgement and respect of already existing freedoms that he had stolen or ignored. In Scotland, the Danes invaded in 1009 and 1010, with King Malcolm defeated by Sven Forkbeard at Nairn, but the Danes withdrew. The next summer, Malcolm defeated Sven at the Battle of Mortlach. Malcolm then invaded Northumbria and annexed some of its territory after the Battle of Carham in 1018. Macbeth, made famous by Shakespeare, seized the throne between 1040 and 1057 after killing King Duncan, but was defeated by Duncan's son Malcolm at the Battle of Dunsinane in 1054, which led to his death 3 years later. Malcolm III reigned from 1057 to 1093 and fought with the English, but was forced by William the Conqueror to submit to his authority. Rebelling, Malcolm was killed at the First Battle of Alnwick. David I ruled from 1124 to 1153 and helped Matilda in England with her efforts mentioned before. Malcolm IV had to surrender conquered English land to Henry II. William the Lion, Malcolm IV's brother, ruled from 1165 to 1214, but was captured at the Second Battle of Alnwick and forced to pay ransom to the English king. In Ireland, the 10th century opened up with Brian Boru, High King, defeating Mael Secnail II, former High King, and the 12th century ended with the Norman conquest with lots of internal squabbling and fighting in between. Before England fell to the Normans, Harold of England had defeated and killed Harold III Hardrada, who had failed to conquer Denmark for his native Norway. A dynastic civil war ensued after the reign of the Danish king who fought him. Sven II Estridsson and his 5 sons had passed away. Valdemar I won the struggle and became known as the Great, ruling from 1157 to 1182. He was assisted by a famous statesman and religious leader named Absalon. So we're going to go down into continental Europe next, talk a little bit about that, just some things you should know before we get to the 100 Years' War, very important event in history. So anyway, I hope you'll dig into some more of those things I talked about, dig into them, learn about them more specifically if you're interested in that era and those people. Fascinating stuff. Thank you for listening.